The rain was falling lightly over the city, tinting the asphalt with silvery reflections. The soft sound of the drops against the glass mingled with a distant hum of cars, creating an almost melancholic atmosphere. Inside a small downtown cafe, Laura flipped through a folder full of overdue bills. The edges of the papers were already worn, as if each crease carried the weight of sleepless nights. She took a deep breath, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest. In recent months, life had become a series of small shipwrecks. Since the death of her mother, her only close family, Laura had been living alone in a modest apartment, balancing her modest salary as a pediatric nurse with the growing cost of living in the city. She loved her work, but it rarely came with stability. Laura, the voice of Marina, her longtime friend and hospital colleague, broke the cafe as silence. Laura looked up and saw Marina, drenched from the rain but with an unusual gleam in her eyes. She quickly sat down, dropping her bag on the chair. "I have something for you. It's not exactly common, but it could change your life." Laura raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I'm listening." Marina leaned forward, as if about to share a secret. "There's a man, Gabriel Montero. Maybe you've heard of him. Businessman, millionaire, lost his wife a few months ago. He has a newborn baby and is looking for someone to care for the child exclusively. But it's not just taking care. He wants someone to live in the house." Laura blinked, surprised. "Live in his house? Completely dedicated to the baby?" Marina nodded. "Yes. He doesn't want regular nannies. He wants someone with medical training, experience and, well, patience to deal with his withdrawn manner." The last nurse left after 2 weeks. Laura let out a short, humorless laugh. "And do you think I should apply for that kind of challenge?" "I think you need to," Marina replied seriously. "The salary is far above average. And, Laura, from what I know, he's desperate, though he doesn't show it." The idea seemed absurd. Caring for the son of a rich, reclusive man living under the same roof sounded like a recipe for discomfort. But as she looked again at the pile of bills, she realized she didn't have many options. That same night, lying in bed with the distant sound of rain, Laura found herself imagining what that mansion might be like. She also imagined the baby, so small and defenseless. A part of her, the part that had never stopped being driven by compassion, felt a silent calling. 2 days later, she stood before the tall wrought iron gates that guarded the Montero estate. The mansion rose on the horizon like something out of a dream or a movie. Wide windows reflected the overcast sky, and stone columns supported spacious balconies. The air smelled of eucalyptus from the ancient trees surrounding the entrance. A security guard led her through the garden, where marble-carved fountains sang a soft song. Laura felt her heart race with each step. Upon entering the foyer, she was greeted by a perfectly composed housekeeper, who guided her to a large room with cream-colored walls and big windows. It was there she saw him for the first time. Gabriel Montero stood near a lit fireplace, hands in his pockets and eyes fixed on the flames. Tall, broad-shouldered, with slightly tousled dark brown hair. His face bore the mark of grief, not just in the tired features, but in the way he avoided her gaze. "Miss Laura, correct," he said, without a smile. His voice was deep, almost hoarse. "Yes, it's a pleasure to meet you." He gave a short nod, as if formalities were a waste of time. "The baby's name is Mateo. He's 3 months old. Sleeps poorly, cries a lot. I don't like visitors or strangers around the house. If you take the job, you'll have the freedom to care for him as you see fit, but within my rules." Laura felt the weight implied in those words. "I understand. And what exactly are these rules?" Gabriel hesitated for a second before answering. "I don't want him exposed to outsiders. No unnecessary outings," and his voice faltered for a moment. "Keep your distance from me when it's not necessary." There was a brief silence, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Laura slowly nodded. "If it's for Mateo's well-being, I'll do whatever it takes." He gestured to the housekeeper, who disappeared down a hallway. Moments later, she returned carrying a small bundle in her arms. At the sight of the baby, something lit up inside Laura. Mateo had big, dark eyes, a soft, curious face, and a sweet scent of milk. He looked at her as if he already knew her. When she held him for the first time, she felt the tension in her shoulders ease. The baby nestled into her arms, letting out an almost imperceptible sigh. Gabriel watched, motionless, but there was something different in his gaze, a spark that vanished too quickly to interpret. In that instant, Laura realized that, however challenging it might be, this would not be just a job. It would be a journey that would change the course of her life. And somewhere deep and silent within himself, Gabriel also knew that, by opening the door to this woman, he was allowing something dangerous and inevitable to begin. The morning after her arrival, Laura woke before dawn. The mansion was wrapped in an almost supernatural silence, broken only by the distant ticking of an old clock somewhere down the hallway. She rose carefully, the wooden floor cold beneath her feet, and followed the soft sound of Mateo's breathing coming from the nursery. The baby's room was spacious and delicately decorated. Sheer curtains allowed the gentle light of early morning to filter in, revealing light wooden furniture and a soft pastel rug. Laura approached the crib and found Mateo asleep, one tiny fist resting on his chest and his lips slightly parted. She smiled, feeling a comforting warmth in her heart. As she adjusted the baby's blanket, a faint sound made her turn. Gabriel was standing in the doorway, watching. He wore a crisp white shirt and tailored trousers, but was still barefoot, as if he had just left his room. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. "He wakes up around 6, Gabriel said, his voice low, as if wanting to preserve the room's silence. "I can see he's sleeping deeply," Laura replied, keeping her tone calm. Gabriel stepped in but stopped a few paces from the crib. His gaze was fixed on his son, though the tension in his shoulders was evident. "He usually doesn't sleep well when I'm not around, but he seems calm." Laura wasn't sure if it was a compliment or merely an observation. "Still," she answered with a slight smile, "maybe he feels safe." The comment made Gabriel avert his eyes, as if the word safe carried more weight than it should. He moved toward a dresser and opened a drawer, taking out a small bottle of infant medicine. "If he cries a lot at night, you can use this, but only if it's truly necessary." "Understood." Laura stored the instruction in her mind, but something in the way he avoided eye contact made it clear that the conversation would go no further. After breakfast, which Laura made a point of preparing for herself and Mateo in the small kitchenette off the kitchen, she decided to discreetly explore the house to better know the environment. The hallways were decorated with modern art and old black and white photographs. One in particular caught her attention. Gabriel and a young woman smiling by the seaside, the wind tousling their hair. The look on his face in that photo was completely different from the Gabriel she knew, open, lit from within. Before she could dwell on it, a gentle voice echoed behind her. That was Helena. Laura turned to find the housekeeper, Donna Teresa, with a dust cloth in her hands. "His wife," the woman added, in a tone that blended respect and sadness. "She died the day Mateo was born." Laura felt a pang in her chest. The photo now carried a new weight. "I imagine it wasn't easy for him." "It's still not easy," Donna Teresa replied, lowering her eyes, "but maybe you can bring a little life back into this house." Later, while caring for Mateo in the glassed-in veranda, Laura saw Gabriel at a distance in the garden. He was on the phone, his expression serious, gesturing occasionally. The wind rustled through the treetops, and the fresh scent of eucalyptus drifted toward her. When he ended the call and stepped into the veranda, Mateo let out a small sound of delight, reaching out his hands. Gabriel approached, and Laura instinctively handed the baby to him. For a moment, Gabriel seemed to hesitate, but then he took his son, holding him with a tenderness that contrasted with his usual controlled demeanor. Mateo touched his father's face with the tips of his fingers, drawing from him a brief smile, almost imperceptible, but real. "He likes you," Laura said, without thinking. Gabriel looked up at her, and there was something different in his expression. "It's not hard to like someone who takes good care of what matters most." The words lingered in Laura's mind long after he walked away. In the following days, a routine began to take shape. Laura spent hours with Mateo, singing softly, taking him for walks in the garden, or rocking him by the window. Gabriel appeared at unexpected moments, sometimes to ask about the baby's feeding, other times simply to watch them in silence. Each encounter was brief, but filled with something she couldn't name. There was an invisible wall between them, yet little by little, she noticed small cracks forming. And though she didn't yet know it, that wall was about to give way in ways that would change everything. The days began to take on their own rhythm inside the mansion. Laura woke before sunrise, breathing in the fresh scent of morning, mixed with the subtle fragrance of flowers drifting in from the garden. She would walk down the silent hallway, her footsteps echoing almost respectfully, until she reached the nursery. There, she would find Mateo smiling with his eyes, as if he knew she would arrive at that exact moment. The baby had become the center of her attention. Laura could interpret each cry, distinguish the sound of hunger from the sound of sleep, and learned small tricks to soothe him when he was restless. While feeding him, she sang soft songs, letting her voice fill the space and break the heavy silence of the house. Gabriel kept his presence like a discreet shadow. He appeared in doorways or hallways, always attentive, but rarely interrupted. Laura noticed that he watched more than he spoke. His eyes followed her every move with Mateo, as if making sure nothing escaped his control. Most mornings, he left early, dressed in impeccable suits, and carrying a leather briefcase. The sound of the car's engine fading into the distance was her signal to breathe a little more freely. Not that he was hostile, but there was something in his demeanor that made her always aware of every word and movement. Donna, Teresa, had become a constant presence, offering hot tea on cold afternoons and sharing discreet stories about the house. It was through her that Laura discovered the upstairs library, a spacious room with shelves reaching the ceiling and the unmistakable aroma of old books. Sometimes, she took Mateo there, sitting by the window, to read aloud, just so he could hear the sound of the words. One afternoon, while reading a children's story, Laura heard the creak of footsteps on the wooden floor. Gabriel was leaning against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. "He likes your voice," he said, with a half smile. "I don't remember ever seeing him so calm." Laura closed the book slowly. "I think he likes the attention more than the story." Gabriel stepped closer to his son, gently brushing a hand over Mateo's soft hair, and for a moment, the air seemed lighter. But he quickly stepped back, as if reminded of something that pulled him back into his usual distance. At night, after Mateo had fallen asleep, Laura would stay alone in the room assigned to her. The light-colored walls and comfortable bed did little to erase the feeling of being in unfamiliar territory. Sometimes, she heard firm footsteps in the hallway during the night. She imagined Gabriel wandering through the house, unable to sleep, trapped in memories he shared with no one. One morning, she found a steaming cup of coffee on the small table next to the nursery. There was no note, but she knew it wasn't from Donna Teresa. The gesture was simple, almost imperceptible, but it made her heart race in a way that left her unsettled for the rest of the day. The mansion, once a cold and silent place, was beginning to change. Laura sensed that Mateo's presence was like an invisible thread, inevitably connecting them. Gabriel, even without admitting it, was yielding a little more each day. Still, there were clear limits. He never shared details about his business or his life before the tragedy. When she ventured to ask something more personal, he would answer evasively. It was as if every word was measured, every revelation carefully controlled. But beneath that self-control, Laura began to notice fleeting moments of vulnerability, the way he closed his eyes when holding his son, as if seeking strength, or the distant look when passing through the garden, stopping before the white roses growing in a secluded corner. It was a silent routine, but not an empty one. Something was growing there. Something that neither grief nor the mansion's high walls would be able to contain for long. Night fell with a harsh wind that made the branches scrape against the windows like impatient fingers. Laura first noticed the change in Mateo's breathing, a short, persistent wheeze, followed by a different kind of cry. The thermometer confirmed it, a fever. She stayed calm, grabbed the baby kit, and began lowering his temperature with warm compresses, speaking softly, moving with the practiced ease of someone who knows the path in the dark. The door opened without warning. Gabriel appeared in the doorway, barefoot, shirt wrinkled, eyes alert. What happened? Low fever, but rising. Probably a virus. I'll monitor him closely. He stepped forward, hands unsure of where to rest. Tell me what to do. Bring filtered water and turn off the brighter lights. I want the environment soft. Gabriel obeyed and returned with a bottle and a clean cloth. He stayed by her side, attentive. The night settled in. Laura alternated compresses, checked his hydration, murmured lullabies. Gabriel slowly discovered that time could be measured in small gestures. Will he be okay? The question came out in a breath. He will. Laura held his gaze. But he needs us to be whole for him, Mateo whimpered. Gabriel offered his finger, which the baby gripped with unexpected strength. Something gave way in the father's expression. I never know if I'm doing it right, he confessed. I always think I'm going to fail him like I failed before. Laura didn't press on the wound. She waited. I wasn't at the hospital when Helena went into labor. His voice was rusted. I was in a decisive meeting. The phone rang. I ignored it for 15 minutes. 15. When I arrived, she was already in surgery. Complications. They said it was quick. For her, not for me. A brief, humorless laugh. I was late for the last goodbye. Laura's heart tightened. Gabriel. Since then, every fever he has throws me back into that delay. As if the clock were a personal enemy. She stepped closer, offering her presence. Guilt tries to convince you that love came too late. But love is here, now, in the way your son needs it. What you do today matters more than what you couldn't do yesterday. He closed his eyes, as if receiving both a blow and comfort. And you? You speak like someone who knows loss. Laura thought of lying, but chose to open the chest. During my internship, I worked on a case that marked me. A young mother couldn't keep her baby. I became too attached to him. On the day they took him away, I stood in the parking lot listening to the sound of the engine fade. The helplessness stayed. Since then, when a child needs me, I give myself completely to them. Maybe it's my way of fixing what I couldn't. The ticking of a distant clock stitched the silence together. Thank you for giving yourself completely to him, Gabriel said. The hours passed, the fever rose, dropped, wavered. Laura assessed the medication, administered it precisely, shifted the baby's position at the first sign of nausea, kept the air moving with the window slightly open. The room filled with the scent of eucalyptus and damp cloth. Around 4 a.m, a clap of thunder announced rain. Exhausted, Mateo relaxed. His skin lost the damp sheen. Gabriel sat on the floor, leaning against the dresser, legs tired from the vigil. Laura offered him a blanket. He accepted it with a new, disarmed look. I see how you look at him, Laura said. No matter what happens, that look doesn't lie. That's how children learn what love is. And how do parents unlearn guilt? He asked, eyes worn. One day at a time. By apologizing when they're wrong, celebrating when they're right, repeating love even when their mind says it's too late. The rain grew heavier, tapping hurriedly against the glass. The room darkened for a second, until a flash revealed Gabriel holding the crib, gently. He took a deep breath. If you stay, the words came raw. If you keep being here with us, I promise I'll learn to listen before deciding. I promise to be there before the clock. Laura hadn't expected promises. She had only hoped Mateo would get better. Still, something lit inside her at that surrender. I'll stay. She placed her hand on his arm. We'll stay. At dawn, the fever broke. The sky brightened to a brief gray, and the garden released the scent of fresh earth. Mateo slept on his side, mouth slightly open, breathing as light as a prayer. Gabriel remained by the window, watching him with a stillness that felt less like fear and more like reverence. "Thank you, Laura," he said simply. "For today." She adjusted the baby's blanket, her eyelids growing heavy. "Difficult nights show us the way to the day," she smiled, "and we walk it together." The first bird sang in the garden. Gabriel opened the window carefully. The cool air entered, bringing the certainty that some pains never disappear, but learn to fit. And, in that house, something had found a crack through which it could begin to breathe. Before the sun rose, Gabriel went down to the garden and returned with 2 white roses. He placed them in a vase beside the crib, a silent request for forgiveness. "Helena liked them," he murmured. "She said their scent felt like a promise kept." Laura breathed in the aroma, the rain. "Then today we have a promise and a beginning," she said. Gabriel nodded, his shoulders eased. The days following the night of the fever seemed to carry a different atmosphere. Laura noticed it in the details. In the hallway, the light felt less cold. In the kitchen, Donna, Teresa, hummed while cutting fruit. Even the silence of the house had lost some of its weight. Gabriel, once so rigid, began to appear at unexpected moments, and not just to inspect. One morning, she found a steaming cup of chamomile tea on the small table in the nursery. No note, but with an almost timid touch of attention. On another day, he appeared with a new, lighter blanket, saying it might be better for Mateo's nights. Laura received these gestures like someone collecting seashells by the shore. Small, discreet, but unique. The barrier between them, though still standing, showed cracks. One late afternoon, she was in the glassed-in veranda with Mateo in her arms, watching the sky turn shades of orange and purple. Gabriel entered, sleeves rolled up and carrying a faint scent of paper and printer ink, a sign he had come from the office. "May I?" he asked, pointing to the baby. Laura handed him over carefully, noting how his arms now adjusted to his son's weight naturally. Gabriel rocked him slowly, and Mateo, drowsy, rested his face in the curve of his father's neck. "He likes your scent," Laura said softly, almost intimately. Gabriel gave a slight smile. "Probably because I've spent half my time holding him since you arrived." Laura let out a light laugh, and for a moment, the atmosphere was simple. No grief, no protocols. Just the 3 of them. It was in that mood that Gabriel began to trust more. One day, she saw him hand Mateo over so Laura could give him a bath, without the long instructions from before. Just "I trust you." That meant more than any speech. But it wasn't only Mateo's care that was changing. There was something in the way they looked at each other. When Laura passed him in the hallway, she felt an extra second before he looked away. Sometimes, during conversations, she noticed that he was paying attention not only to her words, but to the sound of her voice, the way she held a cup, or brushed back her hair. On a rainy afternoon, they found themselves stuck in the library because of a storm that made the lights flicker. Laura was reading a children's book to Mateo, but she realized Gabriel was also listening. When she stopped, he commented, "My mother used to read to me like that. She always said intonation brought the pages to life." "Then you already know what you need to do when Mateo grows up." She smiled. "Maybe," he replied, without committing, but not closing the door either. That same day, Mateo let out his first long bursts of laughter, and they both found themselves laughing along with him. Laura noticed how that shared laughter created a quiet bond, like a secret just between them. At night, while closing the curtains in the baby's room, she saw Gabriel in the garden. He was holding something in his hands, a small wooden toy car, and looking at it as if it were more than just a toy. Then he placed it on the windowsill of the nursery, where Laura would find it the next day. The object bore marks of use, the wood worn at the edges. When she asked about it, Gabriel simply said, "It was mine. I thought Mateo might like to have it." There was no declaration of affection, but the gesture said what words couldn't. The signs were everywhere. They weren't explosive, nor did they come in great changes, but in small permissions. A coffee left at the door, a good morning, less formal, a glance that lingered for just a moment longer. And though neither of them would admit it, both knew that something was moving, something that could never go back. The morning began peacefully, with the gentle aroma of fresh bread coming from the kitchen and Mateo playing on the nursery rug. Laura was taking the opportunity to reorganize some clothes in the wardrobe when she heard the sound of firm heels echoing down the hallway. It wasn't Donna, Teresa. The door opened suddenly, revealing a tall woman with impeccable posture, light brown hair pulled back into an elaborate bun. The strong perfume arrived before her voice. "So it's you." The tone wasn't curious, but judgmental. Laura rose slowly, surprised. "May I ask who you are?" "Clara." The woman lifted her chin with pride. Gabriel's sister-in-law, Helena's sister. The mention of his late wife brought an immediate heaviness to the air. Clara stepped further into the room, as if inspecting every detail. Her eyes fell on Mateo, who looked at her with innocent curiosity. "So this is how he's being raised," she murmured, almost to herself. Laura kept her composure, though she felt the tension rising. "I'm sure Gabriel can explain why I'm here." Clara laughed, but without humor. "Oh, he can explain many things. I just don't know if he'll tell you how much this family has suffered to maintain appearances." She turned, staring at her. "You're young, attractive, you live here, you take care of his son. Do you know what that looks like to others?" The words hit Laura like a calculated blow. She opened her mouth to reply, but Gabriel appeared in the doorway. His gaze quickly passed from Clara to Laura. "Clara, can we talk downstairs?" he said in a controlled voice. "Of course," she replied, walking over to him with a victorious smile. But before leaving, she cast one last look at Laura. "I hope you know what you're getting yourself into." The silence that followed was heavy. Laura bent down to pick Mateo up, her heart racing. She didn't know if she was more shaken by the veiled accusation, or by the fact that Gabriel had said nothing in her defense right there, in front of her. By late morning, when he returned, Laura was in the garden, rocking Mateo. Gabriel approached, but she didn't look at him. "About what happened," he began. "You don't need to explain." Her voice came out colder than she intended. "Your family has every right to know who's caring for Mateo." That's not what she meant. Clara is protective or possessive. Laura lifted her gaze, firm. "You don't need to answer. I already understand." Gabriel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't want this to affect how you care for him." Laura held Mateo closer to her, as if he were a shield. "Don't worry. I do my job regardless of what people say." She walked away before he could say more. Inside, something closed off, not toward Mateo, but toward Gabriel. For the first time, she felt she might be putting too much of herself into someone who still wasn't ready to defend her. In the days that followed, the distance between them grew. Conversations became strictly about the baby. Laura avoided being in the same room with him for long. Gabriel, for his part, seemed to wrestle with something he couldn't or wouldn't say. But Mateo noticed. He cried more, fidgeted in her arms, as if he could feel the invisible cold now haunting the house. And as the tension built, Laura knew things couldn't go on like this forever. Sooner or later, one of them would have to break the silence, and that moment was closer than she imagined. The following days were marked by a thick silence, the kind you don't just hear, you feel. Laura carried out her routine with Mateo, with the same dedication as always. But now every gesture came with an extra effort to avoid crossing paths with Gabriel for too long. At breakfast, if he was in the kitchen, she served her plate and left. In the hallways, she limited herself to a brief good morning, without holding his gaze. In the nursery, conversations stayed strictly on feeding times, clothing changes, and doctor's appointments. Gabriel noticed. He knew something in him had failed that day, when Clara had thrown her barbs, and he, for some cowardly reason, had chosen not to intervene. But instead of fixing it immediately, he stepped back, perhaps out of pride, perhaps out of fear of saying more than he should. Mateo, however, knew nothing of strategic silences. He cried, more, reached for his father as if asking to reconnect, and searched Laura's face with an anxious look. She soothed him with songs, but felt the baby could sense the coldness hanging over the house. On a gray afternoon, Laura was on the glassed-in veranda, trying to distract Mateo with a wooden toy, when she saw Gabriel in the garden. He walked slowly, as if each step were an attempt to organize his own thoughts. His hands were in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the ground. When he came in, she stood to leave. "Laura," he called, in a tone that sounded almost like a plea. She stopped, but didn't turn. "I need to put Mateo to sleep." He took 2 steps closer. "I know I was wrong." Laura turned, holding the baby against her chest. "It's not about right or wrong. It's about being there or not when it matters." Gabriel didn't respond right away. His expression carried something between regret and helplessness. "I've never been good with family confrontations. I always thought avoiding them was the best way to preserve peace. But sometimes, silence screams louder than words," Laura said firmly. "And for the one caught in the middle, that silence weighs heavily." She walked past him and went upstairs. In the nursery, rocking Mateo until he fell asleep, she felt her own heart tired. She wasn't there to fight for a place, but she didn't want to be just a tolerated presence. That night, sitting on the edge of her bed, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Gabriel stopped at the door, hesitated, and then walked away. That almost gesture, the visit that never happened, was enough for Laura to understand he still wasn't ready to cross the distance between them. The mansion returned to being a place of silent routines and avoided glances. But something inside her told her this state couldn't last, because either the bridge between them would be rebuilt, or it would collapse for good. The morning began like so many others. A cloudy sky, the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen, and the soft sound of Mateo babbling in the nursery. Laura was crouched down, stacking a small tower of colorful blocks to entertain the baby when she heard determined footsteps in the hallway. Gabriel appeared at the door. He wore a navy blue shirt and black trousers, but his usual air of formality was gone. There was something else, something resolute in his gaze. "I need to talk to you," he said, in a tone that neither asked nor commanded. Laura set Mateo in the playpen and stood. "Go ahead." "Not here." He motioned for her to follow him. They went together to the back garden. The air was cool, filled with the smell of damp earth. Between the rose bushes and the ivy-covered pergola, Gabriel stopped in front of a small wooden table. On it sat an old, dark wooden box, its edges carved with delicate patterns. "This belonged to Helena," he began, his eyes on the box, not on Laura. "She received it from her mother on our wedding day. She always said she would only keep here what had real value, not monetary value." Carefully, he lifted the lid. Inside were a few small mementos, a child's hair ribbon, a yellowed note, a photograph of Helena smiling beside a friend, and in the center, a silver locket engraved with olive branches. Gabriel took the locket and held it out to Laura. She believed this locket should be with whoever took care of what was most precious to her. Laura blinked, uncertain. "Gabriel, I don't know if I should accept this." "Yes, you do." He stepped closer. "Laura, since you arrived, this house has changed. Not just because of Mateo, but because you brought something I thought I'd never feel again. Trust. I was wrong not to defend you. Not because you needed defending, but because I should have shown that you are part of this family now." The wind stirred Laura's hair. She held the locket in her hands, feeling the cold of the metal contrast with the warmth rising in her chest. "Why are you doing this now?" she whispered. "Because I don't want there to be silence between us anymore." He drew in a deep breath. "And because I realized that if you were to leave, I would lose more than I could bear." For a moment, Laura couldn't find words. She looked at the locket, then at Gabriel. His eyes no longer carried the distance of before. There was a raw sincerity in them, almost disarming. "I'm staying," she said firmly. But not just for Mateo. The corner of Gabriel's mouth curved into a faint smile. He didn't try to embrace her, but the gesture was there in his eyes, in his stance. A restrained gesture, but heavy with promise. They went back into the house together. When Mateo saw them, he broke into a wide smile, as if he understood that something important had just happened. Laura placed the locket around her neck. The cold touch against her skin brought an odd sense of belonging. And, for the first time in a long while, the mansion felt less like a place frozen in grief, and more like one where something new could begin to bloom. The day was sunny, with the garden filled with the fragrance of white roses, when the sound of an imported car shattered the morning's calm. Laura, playing with Mateo in the glassed-in veranda, recognized the silhouette before the door even opened. Clara, dressed in an elegant cream-colored suit and dark sunglasses that hid part of her expression. She walked in without waiting for an invitation, followed by a man in a suit, most likely her lawyer. Gabriel appeared from the hallway, his expression immediately darkening. "Clara, what is the meaning of this?" he asked, his voice tense. "It means I'm tired of watching from afar, while my nephew grows up surrounded by questionable influences," she said, casting a sharp look at Laura. "I came to propose something simple. Let Mateo come with me. I will raise him as Helena would have wanted, far from this emotional mess." Laura's body stiffened, but she kept silent. Gabriel, however, stepped forward. "You have no right whatsoever to take my son." Clara gave a cold smile. "Don't underestimate Helena's family. We have resources, and we know this house's weaknesses." The lawyer placed an envelope on the coffee table. "Papers to begin custody proceedings, should there be no amicable agreement." Laura looked at Gabriel, sensing the tension in his shoulders. As much as he tried to keep control, the threat was real. Clara then turned to her, as if saving the final blow. "And you, Laura, are you really going to stay here, knowing you're at the center of this dispute? This isn't your responsibility. You could simply leave. Avoid all this strain." Laura's heart pounded. Part of her wanted to respond in anger, but another part knew that whatever decision she made here would change everything. She looked at Mateo, who was watching her with wide, trusting eyes, as if waiting for her answer. She took a deep breath. "I'm staying." She turned to Clara. "Because what you call confusion is, in fact, care. Mateo doesn't need a perfect life to be loved. He needs a life where he feels safe, and that's what we're building here." Gabriel looked at her, and there was something new in his gaze. Not just gratitude, but also a silent recognition that she was choosing not only the child, but him as well. Clara, irritated, picked up the envelope. "Let's see how long this certainty of yours lasts." She turned and left, her heels echoing down the hallway until the sound of the door closing. The silence that followed was heavy, but different from what they had lived through weeks before. Gabriel stepped closer to Laura, stopping just inches away. "You had every reason to leave, but you stayed." "Because it's not just about staying," she replied. "It's about not abandoning." He nodded, and for a moment it seemed he wanted to say more, but instead he simply reached out and touched her hand. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of the decision they had both made, to face whatever came, together. And, in that clasp of hands, the final choice was already sealed. The next morning arrived with a timid sun filtering through the nursery curtains. Laura woke to the sound of giggles coming from the playpen. Mateo, sitting and rocking his little body back and forth, seemed to be celebrating something invisible. Gabriel was there, crouched beside him, mimicking his gestures and drawing even more laughter from his son. Laura leaned against the doorframe, watching the scene for a moment. The man of measured steps and distant eyes she had first met was gone. In his place was a devoted father, and a son who recognized it. "Good morning," she said, stepping in. Gabriel stood, holding Mateo in his arms. "He woke up calling for you." Laura took the baby and instinctively kissed his forehead. The medal Gabriel had given her swung against her chest. She held it for a moment, feeling the symbolic weight it carried. "I think he knows we're all on the same side now," she said with a gentle smile. Gabriel returned the smile, though his gaze held something deeper. "Laura, I won't pretend I know what the future will look like, but I do know I want you in it. With us." Her heart skipped a beat. "Then let's find out, one day at a time." In the days that followed, the house gained new sounds, soft music playing in the mornings, Mateo's laughter from improvised games, quiet conversations in the garden at night. The dining table, once a cold, formal space, became the daily meeting point. Donna Teresa, delighted by the change, began cooking dishes Helena had loved, as if stitching the past to the present. One afternoon, Gabriel called Laura to the garden. In the corner where the white roses grew, he had planted 2 new bushes, closer to the veranda. "Helena used to say, roses need constant care to truly bloom," he told her. "I think families are the same." Laura stepped closer, breathing in the rose's gentle scent. "Then, let's take care." And they did. Not just of the plants, but of the home they were building. Mateo grew surrounded by love and presence, and Gabriel discovered that time could be an ally when used to be together, not to count absences. On the last night before winter, they sat together on the veranda, Mateo asleep in Laura's arms. The sky was clear, and the stars felt closer. Gabriel looked at her and said, with the sincerity of someone who no longer had walls to guard, "Thank you for staying." Laura squeezed his hand. "I didn't stay just for him. I stayed because when you find a place that feels like home, you don't leave." The cold wind carried the scent of roses, and in that moment, she knew this was the beginning of a new story. Not perfect, but real. And real was enough to be happy. The night wrapped the mansion in a warm, welcoming silence. Outside, the wind gently moved the leaves of the white rose bushes, their fragrance drifting through the open hallway window. Laura had just placed Mateo in his crib. The baby slept peacefully, his breathing light, his little face completely relaxed. She stood there for a few seconds, simply watching him, as if wanting to imprint that moment of peace in her memory. She closed the door carefully and, as she turned around, found Gabriel leaning against the wall, as if he had been waiting for her. His gaze was different, softer, yet more intense, as if carrying something he no longer wanted to hide. "He fell asleep quickly tonight," Gabriel said in a low voice, not to wake the baby. "I think he felt safe." "That the day was light," Laura replied, taking a few steps toward him. For a moment, they stood face to face, and the hallway seemed to become a world apart, where only the two of them existed. Gabriel pushed himself off the wall and stepped closer, narrowing the space between them. "Since you arrived, everything has changed. Not just for Mateo, but for me," he said, his voice tinged with something between gratitude and hesitation. She smiled faintly, though her heart raced. "I just did what I thought was right. I stayed. And that's exactly it. You stayed when you could have left. You stayed even when I didn't deserve it." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with unspoken words, with glances exchanged over days, with small gestures that had been building up to this moment. Gabriel slowly raised his hand, as if afraid a sudden movement would break the spell, and touched her face. Laura closed her eyes for a brief moment, feeling the warmth of his hand and the firm yet gentle touch. When she opened them again, she found his eyes locked on hers, so close she could feel his breath mingling with hers. "I don't want to keep my distance anymore," he whispered. "Not after everything." Laura didn't answer with words. She simply stepped forward until their bodies brushed lightly. The embrace came naturally, tight, as if both had been holding it in for a long time. She felt his chest against hers, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and realized that the safe place she had been searching for all along was right there, in that moment. Gabriel pulled back just enough to look into her eyes one last time before deciding. Then, unhurriedly, he kissed her. The kiss wasn't rushed. It began softly, as if confirming something they had already known, and then deepened, carrying everything they had held back: the fears, the longing, the desire, and the promise of a future together. When they parted, Laura kept her forehead resting against his, their lips still close. "I think now we're truly on the same side," she said with a soft smile. Gabriel smiled back, his eyes shining in the dim hallway light. Now and always. Outside, the wind once again carried the scent of the white roses, as if the night itself, a silent witness to it all, were blessing that moment. Stories like this show us that love doesn't only bloom on bright days, but is forged in long nights, in difficult words, and in gestures that speak louder than any promise. Laura and Gabriel learned that staying is more powerful than arriving, and that building something together requires the courage to tear down walls and open doors. If you've followed every moment up to here, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for living this story with us. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell so you won't miss the next stories we have prepared for you. Now tell me in the comments, in your opinion, what was the most emotional moment of this story? I really want to know. And don't stop here. We have other exciting stories full of twists waiting for you here on Lasting Tales. Here at Lasting Tales, every story leaves marks that time cannot erase. See you in the next one.